Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I know it's a bit late, but in an effort to try to start making videos more regularly, I thought I'd let you know what books I really enjoyed from 2020. So in 2020, we all spent a lot of times indoors, and although it was one of the busiest years of my life, that still meant that I was able to read quite a few books. Over the last 4 years, I've set the goal to read 52 books, and this was the year that I finally did it. To be fair, at the end of the year, the number one qualification a book had to have was a short amount of pages, but I did it. 52 books is 52 books. I'm proud of it, averaging one a week. So let's get into it in no particular order. Here are my 5 favorite books from 2020. Okay, first up, Atomic Habits by James Clear. So this book is pretty much exactly what it sounds like, but out of all self-help books that I've read, it definitely tops the list for me. James Clear's overarching theme, I would say, is that if you get a little bit better at particular things, it helps you to succeed in really big ways. So he gives the example of the 1% rule, he calls it, where if you get 1% better, you see big results, especially compared to those you're competing with. For example, he talks about a tree in the forest. So if a tree in the forest gets 1% taller, or its leaves are 1% broader, it receives much more sunlight, and thus beating out the trees below it. And that 1% eventually turns into a much bigger percent. Another way to think about it is if you're a student who gets 1% better grades than your peers, you'll be the one that ends up getting into the best schools, getting the scholarships, etc., just by being a little bit better than the people around you. One thing that I liked in particular about this book is that it doesn't feel like any of the chapters are just trying to fill the pages. It seems as though James Clear took all the blogs he's ever written and tried to condense them down into one book, instead of the other way, which I think happens a lot for self-help books. One other thing is James Clear is the only newsletter that I subscribe to that I read his entire email every single week. So if you want something short, to the point, impactful, I would definitely recommend subscribing to his newsletter, checking out his blog, if you haven't bought the book yet. So moving on, book number 2, Range by David Epstein. So this book really spoke to my heart. Probably from the time I was in middle school, I had a slight fear of picking a career that I'd be stuck with forever. And so whether it was through high school or throughout college or work experience that I've tried to gain, I've always tried to have kind of a broad selection of what I study so that I'm not stuck in one career my whole life. So it seems that specialization has been a really strong force ever since the Industrial Revolution. And you hear it all the time, like, become an expert in one field, and that's how you can make money and whatnot. But I feel like when you don't have a particular calling in life, at least not yet, this can feel really stressful. And I've always loved the idea of being a modern day Renaissance man. So Epstein basically makes the argument that generalization, or maybe better put, becoming an expert in multiple fields is the best way to better oneself and society. He argues that greatness through specialization is really more the exception than the rule. And he uses examples like athletes and scientists, those that have really focused in their whole lives on one particular field, and those that have had experience in multiple fields. And it seems that those that have a wider range of opportunities in the long run typically outperform those that have specialized early. And in the end, being able to draw on a large range of subjects sometimes is the only way to solve certain problems. For all of those kids out there that are really struggling on picking a subject, don't worry, pick one for a while, really love it, and don't worry about switching. In the long run, it's probably going to be beneficial. Still not sure how to pronounce this book, but Circe, something like that. Personally, I don't read a ton of fiction, and it's nothing against it, but of all fiction that I've read recently, this is definitely up there. If you're someone that couldn't memorize all the Greek gods or really hated the Iliad and the Odyssey in college or high school when you had to study it, I would not count out this book. For a lot of people, one of the most difficult things about the Greek classics is that there's this assumption that you know all of these relationships between these gods, where these cities are located, their relationships to each other, because really those stories were written for a people that understood that culture in that time. Madeline Miller writes assuming that you don't know any of that. So it's perfect. If you don't know who Odysseus is, or Zeus is, or their relationship to each other, or Troy, or anything like that, It doesn't matter. My opinion is that an expert in Greek mythology would love this book just as much as someone that knows nothing about it, because of Madeline Miller's take on this individual who is a witch, and because anyone that's beginning doesn't have to do a bunch of research before they read this book to really enjoy it. This book definitely makes me excited about trying to get back into the classics now that I have a little bit more base understanding. Plus, there's one other book that Madeline Miller wrote, The Song of Achilles, I think it's called. And that one I want to read as well before I jump into some more of the Greek classics this year. Why We Sleep. This book is honestly life-changing. I'm not sure that I've ever read a more convincing book and one that has motivated me more immediately than Why We Sleep. The great thing about Matthew Walker is that he's not just some life coach or health guru or something like that. He's actually a sleep scientist. So he spent years in the field studying sleep. He's conducted hundreds of experiments and has basically dedicated his life to sleep. And now he's written this book, which I think is perfect for someone that isn't a scientist to understand what sleep is, why we do it, and why we should, honestly, all of us, do a little bit more of it. It's convincing. It'll make you think that your health, your relationships, everything, honestly, will get better if you sleep more. A brief warning, although this book may not be written for scientists, it is a bit dense. You're going to be learning about sleep in all of its glory, including melatonin cycles, the circadian cycles, and whatnot. It's not a light read, but it's definitely worthwhile. Okay, last, definitely not least, definitely doesn't fit into books that I normally read, but I loved this. Solutions and Other Problems by Allie Brosh. She's great. I read her first book earlier in 2020, loved it so much I bought her book that she wrote in 2020, and I think this is the only book that I read in 2020 that was actually written in 2020. That was a lot of 2020s. Allie Brosh is an internet blogger turned book writer, and she is an expert in humor. Let me just read you this quote that Bill Gates himself actually wrote about this book. I love her approach. Looking, listening, and describing with the observation skills of a scientist, the creativity of an artist, and the wit of a comedian. Amazing. And true. I highly recommend this book, especially if you're like, I need to read another book, but I'm not feeling it. I wish I could just read a quick one and really just enjoy it. Allie Brosh is the way to go. Highly recommend, especially if you have spent much time at all around dogs or pets in general. She writes quite a bit about her dog or cat, and it's hilarious. If you get this book, I guarantee that even though you might not laugh out loud, you'll at least breathe out a little bit louder once in a while reading the book. Though, in all honesty, I know humor is completely subjective, so if you don't agree with me, that's fine. Okay, so that's a wrap. My 5 favorite books I read in 2020. Let me know in the comments, did you read any of these books? Did you have a favorite that you read in 2020? I am always looking for recommendations for books to read. I'm on Goodreads, which is linked below, so you can check out what I'm reading right now. Typically there's like 30 or so books on my currently reading list, which is not true, but I tend to get like a fourth or halfway through a book and then decide to read something else for a while before finishing it. So yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching. Let me know if you like this video. I plan to upload some more videos on things I'm reading and that I enjoy learning. So until the next time, stay curious.